what I want to do during our short time together today is talk to you about human motivation. But before I do that, I have a quick question here. Is anybody hungry? No, I'm serious. It's a serious question. I mean, you've been sitting here for a while. Anybody hungry? Okay? You in the blue shirt right there. What's your name? Todd? Ron. Ron is hungry. He's told 7,000 people here and 100,000 people around the world that he's hungry. Well, Ron, you're in luck because I figured somebody would be hungry, so I got you a couple of energy bars here today, okay? So there you go. Lucky you, Ron. Now, we'll get those to you in a minute. But what we've seen there, ladies and gentlemen, is a motivation, right? We have a biological drive. We eat when we're hungry. We drink when we're thirsty. We have sexual relations to satisfy our carnal urges, okay? That biological drive is part of what it is to be human, right? Okay? But that's not all that it is to be human, is it? I mean, except if maybe you're a guy between 16 and 18. I was one. Because human beings are more complex than that, right? We have other motivations besides our biological drive, all right? And let me say, to demonstrate what I mean, tell me your first name right there.
Ron.
No, it's not. Ron. Do you see it alphabetically, so these are the R's? I'm not going with another Ron. What's your name next to Ron? Huh? Tawani. Now, I've got a problem, okay? Ron won, and I have a problem. Because I promised to give him these things, these power bars here. But as you can see, Tawani, I'm here, and he's there. But I have a solution to the problem, okay? Tawani, if you give Ron 1 these 2 energy bars, okay, just walk back 10 rows and give it to him, I'll give you $10. Okay? There you go. No, you got to deliver first, all right? So there's Ron. Come on, Tawani, a little faster here. All right, let the record show that Ron 1 has his... Did you keep one of the energy bars? No, okay. Let the record show that Ron 1 has the energy bars. And here, Tawani, so here we go. This is real American currency here. All right, here you go. Tawani, there's $10. Give it up for Tawani. Now, what we've seen there is another motivation, right? We can call that our second drive. We have a biological drive, but we also have a reward and punishment drive, too. Typically, human beings, if you want people to do certain things, you're more likely to get them to do it if you reward it. If you want to deter them from doing things, what do? You punish it, okay? Human beings respond exquisitely to rewards and punishments in our environment. That is a part of what it is to be human. Okay? But that's not all it is to be human, right? Because human beings also have a third drive. We do things because they're interesting. We do things because we like doing them. We do things because they're meaningful. We do things because they contribute to the world. We do things because we are part of something larger than ourselves, right? That third drive is also part of what it is to be human, right? I was expecting a slightly more rousing yes, but that's okay. No, because let's explore this for a moment here, okay? That third drive, if that third drive is not part of what it is to be human, let me ask you a question. What are you doing here? I mean, think about it. This is, a very, very attractive audience, and I can't see them, but I'm sure that the audience in China and Argentina and in Spain and in Sweden is equally attractive, especially the ones in Sweden. But chances are participation in this global leadership summit here isn't going to satisfy your biological drive, right? Okay, it's not going to satisfy your reward and punishment drive because no one out of the 7,000 people here or the 100,000+ people around the world, no one's going to make a buck except for Tawani. So why are you here? You're here because you want to learn. You're here because you want to connect. You're here because you have a relationship. You're here because you believe in something larger than yourself. And that third drive is a powerful part of what it is to be human. But the problem is that it's something that is routinely routinely neglected inside of organizations. Now, I'm not a theologian, but I'm somebody who studies business, and I'm somebody who studies science. And what I have done over the last few years is taken a look at the volumes and volumes of research on human motivation. There's about 50 years of research, 50 years of hard science about human motivation. And what it does, ladies and gentlemen, is it calls into question some of the assumptions about how we run organizations, whether they're for-profit organizations like companies or not-for-profit organizations like churches. I want to tell you a little bit about the science because I think the science will allow you to challenge some of your assumptions, and then we'll talk about how we can use the science to tap that third drive and perform at higher levels. So let's talk about the science, okay? The view, unfortunately, inside of organizations is a two-dimensional view of human beings. We end up stopping at that second drive. We try to restrain the biological drive, and we try to amplify the reward and punishment drive. And that's where we stop. That's a two-dimensional view of human beings. And here's the thing, not only is that not particularly humane, it doesn't work very well. There's 50 years of science that tells us this. So let's talk about the science of rewards and punishments very quickly, okay? Let me tell you about one interesting, very representative study about the science of rewards. This takes us to the mean streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts, where a group of economists did a study with some MIT students, Massachusetts Institute of Technology students. And what they did is they asked these students to do a series of tasks, okay? Physical tasks like throwing a ball through a hoop, and then cognitive tasks of increasing complexity, whether it's memorizing strings of digits or solving complicated problems. And what they did is they divided the people into three groups. One group, they said, if you do really well, you're going to get a small reward. The second group, they said, if you do really well, you get a larger reward. And to the third group, they said, if you do really well, you get a big reward, a lot of cash. Okay? The idea is how much would the reward influence the performance? And it turned out that it did have a big influence. As the scientists write, as long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better the performance. Okay? But, and here's where it gets interesting, once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, their phrase, not mine, rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward led to worse performance. Right. It's not supposed to work that way. It's not supposed to work that way. This seems, in some ways, sort of contrary to our view of how economies work, right? Except this study was done by 4 of the best economists in North America and funded by the Federal Reserve Bank. This is the mainstream of the mainstream reaching this conclusion. And here's what 50 years of science tells us about a certain set of rewards, what I call if-then rewards. If you do this, then you get that. Those kinds of rewards, those kinds of motivators work really well for simple tasks, for straightforward tasks, where you're following a set of rules to a conclusion, marching down a set of steps, reaching your destination. They work like a dream for that. You eliminate distractions, you focus, you get the job done. However, they don't work very well for more complicated, complex conceptual tasks. They don't work very well when you have to draw on creativity. Why? Because those kinds of rewards, if-then rewards, they give you tunnel vision. You're focused on the rewards. You should have seen Tawani when I offered her $10, all right? I'm serious. It's a natural response. Her eyes widen, literally. All right, she's focused. Wow, $10, what can I do to get that? All right, that's what these kinds of rewards do. That's great if it's simple. That's great if it's delivering 2 energy bars to Ron. It's not so good if you're solving a complicated problem. This has been found over and over and over and over and over and over and over again in the science. This is as close to incontrovertible as you can get in the social sciences. This is what I live in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. This proposition that if-then rewards work for simple tasks but don't work very well for complicated creative tasks, this is what we Washingtonians call a true fact, okay? This is something that is inviolable. And yet, it's routinely ignored. And when in our organizations, when we see these carrots and sticks demonstrably fail before our eyes, when we see these carrots and sticks demonstrably fail before our eyes, We don't say, man, they failed again. Maybe we need a new approach. We say, wow, it failed again. Looks like we need some more carrots. Looks like we need some sharper sticks. And I think it's taking us down a fundamentally wrong path. It's taking us down a fundamentally wrong path. And I think there is a better path out there. I think it's a path that is both satisfies our intuitions as human beings, but also conforms to what science tells us about what really motivates people. And I think if we understand that science, we can lead organizations better, we can lead lives of meaning and purpose a little bit more robustly. And that leads me to a story. I want to tell you a story about one company that has done this. One company that has done things a little bit different. It's a company out of the United Kingdom called Redgate Software. Redgate Software. And here's what they did. They did something radical. They had a problem. They had a sales force, right? Many organizations obviously have sales forces. They had a sales force. Now, how do you compensate salespeople? Commissions, right? Commissions. That's how salespeople sell, right? That is a law of nature, right? That's how salespeople sell. If you don't know commissions, no one's going to sell anything, right? But they had a problem. They had a compensation system where they provided commissions to their salespeople. And what happened? The salespeople began gaming the system. Not because they're bad people, because they're human beings. So what did the company do? The company made the sales compensation system a little bit more complex. So what did the salespeople do? Exactly. They upped their game. So the management says, wow, they're gaming the system again. Let's make it more complex. So what do the salespeople do? Up their game. And finally, the CEO of this company said, this is crazy. What are we doing? I think we need to try a radical approach. I think that we should eliminate commissions for our salespeople. Now, if any of you here or out there are salespeople, this is crazy talk. Eliminate commissions for sale. It doesn't work that way. So the CEO said, you know what? I want to do this. So what he did is he went to talk to the two top salespeople, the two heads of his sales division, Tom and James, right? Those aren't their real names, but we're going to call them Tom and James. Tom and James. He goes to Tom and he says, Tom, sit down for a second. I got something to talk to you about. We got a problem with our sales compensation system. We got a problem with our commission system. So I'm thinking about doing something strange and radical. Just hear me out. I'm thinking about eliminating commissions for our salespeople. But I'm going to raise your base salary and give you everybody some profit sharing at the end of the year. What do you think? Tom. I actually think it's a pretty good idea. It would make us more collaborative. It would take some of the pressure off. I think it's better for our customers. The problem you're going to have is that James will never go for it because James only cares about money. Okay? Good, thank you. So it goes to talk to James. A little bit of trepidation here because James is a hard charger. James, sit down. No, sit down, James. James is not very compliant. We got a problem with our compensation system. We got a problem with our commission system, so I have a solution. It's a radical solution. I'd like you to sit down and just hear me out. I want to eliminate commissions. James, start standing up. Sit down, James. Just hear me out. Eliminate commissions, raise base salaries, give people some profit sharing at the end of the year. What do you think? James, are you serious? Yeah, I'm serious. James, I actually think it's a pretty good idea. We ended up being pit against each other, so we're always competing with each other rather than with our competitors. There's not a lot of collaboration around here. I think our customers are becoming distrustful for us. Believe it or not, I think it's a good idea. The problem is that Tom will never go for it because Tom only cares about money. One of the problems that we have inside of any organizations is that we make the wrong assumptions about people. And one of the things that you see in any endeavor, if you begin with the wrong assumptions, no matter how hard you work, no matter how smart you try to be, it doesn't go very well. And I think that there are two false assumptions inside of organizations, two assumptions that are flatly wrong, that if we begin with those assumptions, we run awry. One false assumption inside of organizations is this, that human beings are machines. Complicated machines, but basically mechanistic. That is, if we press the right levers in the right way, people will pretty much do what you want them to do. okay? That human beings are semi-sophisticated robots, and if you just sort of move the right levers properly at the right time, human beings will respond in the way that you expect them and want them to do. That is not true. Your intuition tells you it's probably not true. 50 years of science verifies that. That is not true. If you think of human beings, the human beings you're leading, whether in a private organization or in a public organization, as simple machines, you will run awry. Human beings are far more complex than that. That's the first nefarious assumption. The second assumption is even uglier, I think, but it's persistent. And that is the belief that human beings are blobs. I've had this conversation with managers. They say, Dan, I know what you're saying. I get what you're saying, that sort of doing things out of a sense of intrinsic motivation, that giving people lots of freedom, that people will do better. And I generally agree with that, but what you don't understand is that I have to deal with these people. They're not like that. They're basically passive and inert. If I didn't threaten them with sticks or entice them with carrots, they would just sit there and do nothing. Now, that is a theory of human nature. I think it's the wrong theory of human nature. The wrong theory of human nature. I do not think our nature as human beings is to be passive and inert. I think our nature is to be active and engaged. That is our essence. That is our nature. Why do I believe that? Do I believe that because I'm some kind of woolly-eyed optimist? No. I believe that because I have 3 kids and I've seen a lot more kids. I defy you to find me a 2-year-old in any country in the world who is passive and inert. I defy you to find me a 4-year-old who is not active and engaged. That is, I'm a nerd, as you probably have detected, and I want to use a metaphor here. That is, in computer terms, that is our default setting, all right? When the product ships from the factory, that's the default that is checked. Our nature is to be active and engaged. Now, I think that events and circumstances can conspire to change the default and make people passive and inert, but I think our essence as human beings is to be active and engaged. And another reason I believe that is not only by looking at kids, is that when I talk to those managers, and I ask them, well, you think that these other folks who are in your organization are passive and inert and lazy and respond only to carrots and sticks, is that how you are? Everyone says, oh, no, I'm different. But you're not that different. Get rid of those 2 assumptions, that human beings are machines and that human beings are blobs, and it takes you in far more promising directions. And what's exciting about that is that this body of science shows us what that direction looks like. Okay, so let's talk about what does work, especially for the complicated, conceptual, creative tasks that most of you out there and in here are doing. There are 3 key elements for enduring motivation for these more complicated tasks. The science shows us 3 key motivators here. They are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. AMP. AMP. Completely inadvertent that it ended up that way. AMP, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Let's talk about autonomy, okay? We're going to talk about these 3 things. Autonomy. To talk about autonomy as an enduring motivator for things, we need to talk about another concept, another word. We need to talk about the word management. Think about the word management. We sometimes don't consider that word carefully enough. We look at management the way we would look at a river or a tree or a mountain. When you go by a river or a tree or a mountain, you don't stop and say, wow, where did that come from? You just say, oh, it's, for all intents and purposes, it's always been here. That's how we think about management. But management didn't emanate from nature. Management wasn't delivered to us from God. Gary Hamel has said this the U.S. management strategist, Gary Hamel has said this very, very well. Management is a technology. Management is a technology. It's something that some guy invented. It's a technology from the 1850s. How many technologies do we use from the 1850s today? It's an 1850s technology. We might rub off some of the rough edges, but we don't, I mean, the telegraph is an 1840s technology, and you're going to get the smartest minds in the world to take a telegraph for the last 200 plus years, or 250 years, and build the world's most awesome telegraph, right? It's still a telegraph. I'm still going to text you, not send you a telegram. Management is a technology designed to get compliance. That's what it is for. It is a technology designed to get compliance. But we don't want compliance in our organizations today. Our organizations are too complicated. We want engagement. And management fundamentally does not lead to engagement. Management leads to compliance, but self-direction leads to engagement. Self-direction leads to engagement. And you can ask yourself this question. Ask yourself to think about, or ask somebody to tell you about their best boss. Their best boss. Who's the best boss you ever have? You very rarely see people say, let me tell you about my best boss. She was awesome. She breathed down my neck the whole time. She told me exactly what to do. She gave me no freedom. That's not how human beings engage. We engage through self-direction. And what this means is that in any kind of an organization, but particularly in a church organization or a nonprofit organization, where you don't even have many carrots to give out. What works a lot better is autonomy, and particularly giving people autonomy over various dimensions of their work. Autonomy over their time, autonomy when they do what they do, autonomy over their team, who they do it with, autonomy over their task, what they actually do, and autonomy over their technique, how they do it. Autonomy over those four elements, time, team, task, and technique, that's what leads to engagement. And what's cool is that there actually are some organizations out there that are taking this very radical approach to autonomy and delivering very good results. Let me tell you about some of these examples from around the world because I think they're really interesting and even in their own way exciting. Example one. There's an Australian software company called Atlassian. Okay? They do something really cool. Once a quarter, they say to their software developers, on a Thursday afternoon, go work on anything you want, as long as it's not part of your regular job. Go work on anything you want, as long as it's not part of your regular job. All we ask is that you show what you've created to the rest of the company on Friday afternoon in this kind of fun, all-hands meeting. Okay? They call these things FedEx days. Why? Because you have to deliver something overnight. It turns out that that one day of intense, undiluted autonomy, has led to a whole array of fixes for existing software, a whole array of new ideas for products, a whole array of ideas for reforming what goes on within the company that had otherwise never emerged. Okay? This is not the biological drive. This is not the reward and punishment drive they're tapping. They're tapping that third drive. They're starting with the assumption that people are active and engaged and want to do good work. And in some ways, if you get out of their way, that's what leads to great results. It's worked so well that they've upped the ante at Atlassian. So now at Atlassian, they do something called 20% time. 20% time. And what that means is that at this company, people can spend 20% of their time working on whatever they want. Now, this is done, as many of you probably know, most famously here in America, at Google. Google has been doing this almost since its inception. And it turns out that it's a pretty smart move on Google's part, because Google is not signing away the intellectual property rights to what's created during that 20% time, which is very shrewd. Has anybody ever today, let's take a little survey of the audience here, has anybody today, or not today, this week used Google News, looked at Google News to check the news? All right, lots of you. Google News is terrifying the newspaper business around the world. Google News, not an official project, a 20% project. Does anybody have a Gmail account by any chance? Wow, everyone has a Gmail account. Gmail, not an official project. Gmail was a 20% project. And if you go into Google and interview the people here, you see things like what Alec Proudfoot says. He says, just about all the good ideas here have bubbled up from 20% time. Sort of makes you wonder what they're doing the other 80%, but still proves the point. So how do you bring this into play, whether it's in your church or in a private sector organization? I think it's difficult, and I actually think you need to go slow. Think about this for a second. Think about, imagine a guy named Fred. Fred works at your company. Fred works at your company. Fred's been working at your company for 20 years, doing things pretty much the same way for the last 20 years. You can't go into Fred on Monday morning after the long, hey, Fred, how was your weekend? Oh, pretty good. I got something to talk to you about, Fred. What? Get ready, Fred. 20% time, baby. Fred's going to wig out, right? That's too abrupt. That's too much. That's too much. What you need instead, and again in the organizations, is that one of the scholars behind this, the new research in motivation is a fellow named Richard Ryan at the University of Rochester in New York in the US. And Richard Ryan talks about the need for, it's a lovely term, for scaffolding. Okay? If you want people to be more self-directed, it's not an off-on switch. It's a dimmer switch, and you got to provide some scaffolding for people to get there. So what can you do? Well, in your organization or your church, you can try a FedEx Day. Why not? It doesn't cost anything. I think people will knock your socks off with FedEx Days. What I've seen in organizations around the world is that the first time people try a FedEx Day, it's pretty good. The second time they do it, it frickin' rocks. Because you're tapping that third drive. You could even try your own modified version of 20% time, what I would call 20% time with training wheels. So think about this, because I do think that most organizations can't go straight to 20% time. It's too abrupt. But you can do the scaffolding. You can do 20% time with training wheels, or in the UK, they call training wheels stabilizers, all right? 20% time with stabilizers. To me, that sounds like a pharmaceutical, but that's just my American bias. 20% time with training wheels. How would that work? Let's not make it 20% time. Let's call it 10% time, right? Let's start with 10% time. What's 10% time in a 5-day work week? It's one afternoon a week. Who among us has not squandered one afternoon a week at work? Let's redeploy that to cool individual projects that help the company, that help the organization. And don't do it for everybody. Do it for a group of people who you think would be most receptive to it. And don't do it forever. Do it for 3 months or 6 months. 20% time with training wheels. Start providing that scaffolding to give people that self-direction, that autonomy over their time, over their team, over their task, over their technique. That's how human beings engage. That's how they do great things. Let's go to the next one. Remember, we have AMP. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Let's talk a little bit about mastery. Think about something. Think about a weekend, whether you are in Sao Paulo, Brazil, or whether you're in Stockholm, Sweden, or whether you're in Chicago, Illinois. On a weekend, you're going to have somebody in one of those cities probably spending part of his time on the weekend playing the bassoon. Okay, that wind instrument, right? Playing the bassoon. Now, playing the bassoon on the weekend is strange behavior, right? I mean, strange in the sense that a biologist can't explain that, right? Playing the bassoon on the weekend doesn't satisfy your biological drives, right? Okay? An economist has a hard time explaining this because playing the bassoon typically doesn't make you a lot of money, right? It's the bassoon. So why is that person playing the musical instrument on the weekends for no money? Why? Because it's interesting, because it's fun, because it's inherently rewarding, because you get better at it. That is fundamental to being a human being, and once again, routinely neglected inside of many organizations. And even worse, there's a growing body of evidence that shows it might be the single most powerful motivator at work. Let me give you one example from a terrific researcher at Harvard Business School named Teresa Amabile. She did this long study of motivation inside of companies in North America, and where she had people, several thousand people over several years, each day write down their level of motivation. Okay? We get a good picture of our mental state if we chart it every single day. If we say, how was your week? People remember the highs, remember the lows, but don't remember the day-to-day. So several thousand workers at several companies over several years. This glorious picture of what really motivates people at work. When are people feeling most motivated? She crunches the numbers. It's not even close. It's not even close. The single largest motivator at work, she found, was making progress. Making progress. The days that people were making progress in their work. Again, it's a day. You don't make a huge amount of progress in a day. The days that people were making progress, getting a little bit better, contributing a little bit more, those were the days they felt most motivated. Those were the days they felt most engaged. Those were the days they felt most loyal to the organization. Now this, to my mind, recasts the role of a manager, not as someone trying to get compliance, but someone trying to help people see their progress, put people in positions where they can make progress. Making progress is inherently motivating. It's also, again, for those of you in the nonprofit sector, the dirty little secret about making progress as a motivator, it's free. It's inherently motivating. Now, how do we do this? How do we do this? There's a concept from the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, originally from Hungary, now in the United States, called flow. What he talks about flow. Flow are those delicious moments in our life when the challenge is so matched to our capabilities that we lose a sense of time, we lose a sense of self. You could see it in the faces of the musicians who perform here. They're not conscious of time. They're not conscious of themselves. They're in the moment. Those are among the most exalted experiences of human existence. And what's curious about the research on flow is that we're more likely to have those moments at work than in leisure, in part because leisure is so passive. We want challenge. And so the more we create organizations that are flow-friendly, that give people that sense of flow, the better people will perform. One other way to do this. In order to achieve mastery, whether it's sports or music or art or anything, you have to have feedback. You have to get information on how you're doing. And unfortunately, the workplace is one of the most feedback-deprived environments in our existence. Think about it. What's the mechanism in our organizations typically for getting feedback? Performance review, exactly. An annual performance review, right? Think about that. This is a pretty flawed institution when you think about it, all right? Let's analogize to tennis here for a second. All right, imagine if Rafael Nadal or Serena Williams got feedback on their tennis once a year. See, they wouldn't be very good tennis players, right? Because you need the rich, robust feedback. The other thing about performance reviews is that they're not authentic conversations. They are, in my view, since they were birthed here in North America, they're basically, in my opinion, they're America's form of kabuki theater, where people are these kind of highly stylized, rehearsed encounters where people are kind of following memorized scripts and hoping it gets over very quickly. So how do we get more feedback in our organizations? I think as individuals and as leaders, we need to encourage people to take it into their own hands. And in some ways, we should be out there doing our own performance reviews. So something like this. At the beginning of the month, you set out your goals, your performance goals and your learning goals. Then, at the end of the month, you call yourself into the office. Give yourself an assessment. Where are you making progress? Where are you falling behind? What tools and information do you need to do a little bit better? Now, what's curious about this is that this is already happening around the world. You look at teams and organizations in Europe and South America and Asia and here in North America, groups of teams that are cohesive. They do this already. They will meet, not with the boss's approval, not because they've asked permission from the boss. They will meet and they will go do this and have a meeting at a coffee shop and say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish this month? Here are our goals. We'll meet at the end of the month, give ourselves feedback. Right? Small entrepreneurs around the world have been doing this since there were small entrepreneurs. Right? Look at any great athlete. Read the story of any great athlete. He or she has coaches, but he or she is also meticulously charting their feedback, keeping records of what they're doing. This is an ethic of setting our own goals, or setting our own team goals, working together to set goals, evaluating ourselves that is powerful in achieving mastery. And in many ways, our organizations aren't constituted to do this, so we need to do it ourselves. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Let's go to purpose. I think, as I look around the times that we inhabit right now, I think there's a palpable sense that a page is turning. A page is turning. And what I see in organizations is this. I think we are seeing the limits of the profit motive. The profit motive is a very good thing. It is a good thing morally. It is a good thing for efficiency. But it's not the only thing. And I think more and more, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector or the nonprofit sector, and as you all know, the borders between those are blurring. There's a rise of what you might call the purpose motive. The purpose motive. And I think one of the things we've seen in the last decade or so, is when the profit motive comes unmoored from the purpose motive, bad things happen. Bad things ethically, but you know what else? To me, that's not even the biggest problem. I mean bad things in the sense of mediocre things, average things, uninspiring things. Why is that the case? Because I think inside of organizations, for-profit organizations, where if the single rallying cry inside an organization is let's raise earnings per share 4 cents this quarter, that is a good and noble goal. I gotta tell you folks, it's not the kind of thing that makes most people leap out of bed in the morning, race to work to do something amazing. It is, to my mind, insufficiently motivating. And I think one of the things that's so interesting going on right now is that we always tell the social sector, the not-for-profit sector, you have to act like a business. I think that's a mistake because as someone who studies businesses, most businesses aren't run very well. But I think more and more what you're seeing is almost a reverse, where people are telling businesses, you know what? You've got to act more like the social sector. The only way people will be enduringly motivated is if they're animated by something larger than themselves. If they're animated by a purpose larger than themselves. I have one little exercise on this that I want to give to you. It's a diagnostic exercise. And it comes from an old boss of mine, a guy named Robert Reich, who was the US Labor Secretary for a few years, who I had the good fortune of working for. And I like this test, I like this diagnostic tool because I think it's effective, and I also like it because it's simple and it's free. Here's what he taught me to do. When he would go to visit organizations and talk to people who were working there, go to visit companies and people working there, he would say, I listen to what people tell me, but I also listen for the pronouns they use. When people describe the organization for which they're working, do they use we or do they use they? When they're talking about their church, when they're talking about the company they work for, do they say, we are doing such and such, or do they say, they are doing such and such? And there's almost a perfect correlation that the we organizations are high performing, and the they organizations, they reveals a sense of alienation, a sense of dissatisfaction that I think limits performance. So I encourage you, as you talk to people, whether it's in your church or whether it's in your own company, what are the pronouns they're using? Are you a we organization or a they organization? If you're a we organization, outstanding. If you're a they organization, start thinking hard about how you can change. And ultimately, that's what we're talking about here in all of these sessions, is change. How do we change things? How do we change our church? How do we change our organization? How do we change our world? And that's a daunting question. If you sit there and say, can I change my organization? The answer, actually, folks, is no. You can't just change your organization. One person simply can't do that. However, that's the wrong question. The question should be, can I change what I do tomorrow? And the answer to that is yes. The answer to that is yes. And that's how change really happens. It happens by people taking small steps in their own world that cascade into something bigger. And change of all kinds also begins, and this is what's so glorious about this summit, I am convinced that anything good in life begins with a conversation. Every great romance began with a conversation. Every great social movement began with a conversation. Every great business began with a conversation. That's what changes the world. And so the more we have conversations about these ideas, the more we can change things. And that's why I'm so deeply grateful to all of you for letting me participate in this conversation, because I think that the cascade of conversations we're having, the small steps you're making in your own world, the collective force of the hearts and minds of the people here, the people watching out there, human beings who want to tap that third drive, the collective power of all that is the sort of thing that changes the world. So for that, I want to thank all of you for changing the world.